I moved across the country a few months ago to start graduate school in history. The goal is to become a professor someday, though I can't pretend the state of the job market isn't daunting. My therapist says the stress of starting over in a new place, diving into a rigorous program, and adjusting to this phase of life might be weighing on me more than I realize. She suggested exercise might help reduce my stress levels, something about cortisol and movement. I'm no chemist, but I figured it couldn't hurt. So I started walking every evening after I got home from campus. I live alone, and while I usually walk solo, my size, 6 feet 5 inches and on the heavier side, means people generally leave me alone. My routine was peaceful at first. Even on nights when my walk started later, I'd find solace in the quiet streets, sometimes catching glimpses of nocturnal wildlife, raccoons scavenging, deer nibbling on grass, or even the occasional owl perched silently above. That all changed a few nights ago. It was late, probably around 11:30. My Friday teaching schedule is brutal, with a recitation that doesn't end until 9-10 p.m., so my walks on those nights are always after dark. I'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I noticed a dog up the street. It wasn't unusual to see dogs in the neighborhood, but something about this one stopped me in my tracks. The dog stood perfectly still, bathed in the glow of a street lamp. Its coat was striking, patches of white, brown, and black fur in an almost calico-like pattern. I thought it might belong to a neighbor, so I called out, "Hey, buddy. Are you lost?" The dog turned its head sharply and locked eyes with me. A shiver ran through my spine. Its eyes were wrong. Too intense, too knowing. Then it let out a sound I'll never forget, a yelp or scream that no dog should make. The noise was sharp and jagged, like a recording played backward. My heart pounded as the dog turned and began walking away. Something in me wanted to follow it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I wanted proof for what I'd just heard. Either way, I took a few hesitant steps, phone in hand, ready to snap a picture. The dog stopped under the next street lamp, its strange eyes still fixed on me. I fumbled with my phone, trying to unlock it, but by the time I looked up again, the scene had shifted. The dog stood on 2 legs. Its movements were deliberate, as though it had been waiting to return to this unnatural posture. Its slack jaw hung open, the tongue lolling grotesquely over its teeth. Each step it took toward me was jerky at first, then eerily smooth. My breath hitched. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but I was frozen, a primal fear rooting me to the spot. The dog wasn't just walking, it was stalking. Its eyes bore into mine, unblinking, and as its gait grew more natural, its form seemed to shift. The longer I looked, the less it resembled a dog and more, something else. Something that wore a dog's skin. Just as my brain finally screamed run, a door down the street creaked open, and a voice cut through the night. "Rex. What are you doing outside?" An older woman stood on her porch, hands on her hips. The creature, Rex, apparently, paused and tilted its head toward her. Then, in one fluid motion, it dropped to all fours. Its jaw snapped shut with a sickening pop. It barked, except the bark came a beat too late, like audio out of sync with a video. The woman didn't seem to notice. "Sorry about that," she called to me. "He's a regular Houdini. Keeps opening the door on his own." Rex darted past her and into the house. The door shut behind them, and I stood there, staring at the now empty street lamp. My legs finally responded, and I ran all the way home. For hours, I sat in my apartment, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. My rational mind tried to dismiss it, maybe I'd been overworked, or maybe the shadows had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. That wasn't a dog. Not really. The next night, I forced myself to go out again, determined not to let fear control me. The streets were quiet, and I started to relax. Then I heard it, a sound behind me, like hooves clicking against pavement. I turned slowly, expecting the worst. It was a deer this time. Relief flooded me, until I saw its eyes. They were the same eyes as the dog's. My stomach twisted as the deer barked. It was the same distorted, too late bark, and this time, I didn't wait for it to move. But before I could turn, its jaw dropped, slack and unnatural, saliva dripping onto the ground. Its hind legs tensed, and I knew it was about to stand. I ran. I didn't stop until I was inside my apartment, the door locked and barricaded with my dresser. My heart pounded as I waited for pounding on the door, for glass shattering, for something. But nothing came. I thought I was safe until I stepped into the shower. As the water flowed, the drain began making a sound. At first, I thought it was just gurgling, but as I leaned closer, the noise became clearer, a whisper. My name. Over and over again. I shut the water off and climbed into bed, shaking. It's been hours, and I can't sleep. My mind is racing, replaying the slack jaw, the too late sounds, the wrongness of it all. And I keep coming back to one horrifying thought. It's not just wearing them. It's learning. Friday is coming, and I don't know what to do. Whatever this thing is, it doesn't need to hurt me. It just needs me to see it. And I don't think it's done showing me yet. The forest was bathed in the unsettling glow of faint, intermittent red flashes, like distant flares being waved across the sky. At first, we joked about UFOs, laughing as we hammered our tent stakes into the ground. There were 5 of us, no doubt about it. We'd been friends since middle school, celebrating our high school graduation with a camping trip, our first big adventure as adults. The flashes of red lingered for a while before gradually fading away as we chatted, focused on the task at hand. Dave was the first to finish setting up his tent. He said he was going to gather some branches for the fire and wandered off into the trees. I remember working alongside him last year at the local gas station. Our night shifts together were the only thing that made that desolate place bearable. Eric was at the far corner, squinting at his tent manual, his round glasses perched precariously on his nose. I wasn't as close to Eric as the others, but I still remembered him as the guy who'd once helped me out in math class when I was hopelessly behind. Ava and Sally, my cousin, were teaming up to set up one of the other tents, their easy chatter filling the air with a sense of comfort. They'd been around for as long as I could remember. I even knew Ava's younger brother, who used to beg to tag along on our outings. We were a tight group. 5 of us. That's how many had arrived. Yet as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the shadows of the trees stretched long across the forest floor, something felt off. The air grew colder, and the wind began to pick up, a soft, eerie whistle threading through the branches. Dave had taken longer than expected to return, so we settled into foldable chairs, our faces growing increasingly anxious as the firelight flickered. I could feel the unease settling in my chest as the warmth from the fire seemed to grow distant, the forest around us feeling more suffocating with every passing second. Eric got up to fetch his flashlight. "Where the hell is Dave?" he muttered, scanning the trees for any sign of him. Just as Eric returned with the flashlight, the rustling of bushes broke the silence, and Dave emerged from the woods, dragging a pile of branches behind him. He dropped them in the fire pit with a clatter and glanced around at us. "Geez, you guys didn't even bother to pull out a chair for me," he said, a grin playing at the edge of his lips as he began arranging the branches. We all chuckled nervously, but something about the way he spoke made my stomach churn. There were 5 chairs, 5. I thought we'd all brought our own chairs, no extra, no forgotten ones. But as I turned my gaze to the others, I realized my mistake. Dave hadn't sat down yet, and we were all still sitting. I tried to reason with myself, but my thoughts swam in a haze, everything felt surreal. I wanted to say something, to figure out what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. It felt as if something were draining my thoughts, yanking them out of my head. The silence in the forest grew oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I scanned the faces of the others. They all looked as unsettled as I felt, glancing around nervously. Eric, fidgeting, was already trying to scan the group for any sign of an extra person. I looked at them, their expressions twisted in confusion and fear, but there was one thing I couldn't explain. I turned to Dave. "How many of us are there?" He froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he quickly scanned the group. His voice faltered. "There's 5 of us, right?" I wanted to believe him, but everything in my body screamed that something was wrong. My stomach twisted. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears as my head spun. "Yeah," Dave said again, trying to sound confident, but there was something in his eyes that told me he wasn't so sure anymore. We tried to shrug it off, but the atmosphere had already changed. The forest had gone completely still. The rustling of leaves had ceased, and the familiar hum of the wind was now gone, replaced by an unnatural silence. Sally suggested that maybe we were all just tired from the long hike. We were all sleep-deprived, and I had to admit it made sense. But it didn't sit right with me. We weren't just tired, we were scared. The evening wore on. Drinks were passed around. We all tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it was impossible to ignore. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Who started the fire?" I asked suddenly, interrupting Ava in the middle of a story. Everyone fell silent. Eric stared at me, his brow furrowed. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Dave shook his head, his expression unreadable. "I didn't start it." Ava looked around, her eyes wide. "Wait, wasn't it someone standing behind Jenny?" I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive darkness of the trees looming behind me. Sally's voice trembled. "No, no. I don't know. I don't know what I saw." She glanced around, frantic, her eyes darting from one face to the next. The fear was palpable, rising in waves. I looked around the circle of chairs. I'd been counting. 5 of us. But why did I feel like there should be 6? "What's going on?" Eric whispered, his voice shaking. It hit me like a physical blow, there were only 5 of us. That's when I realized the horror of the situation. There was something here, something that shouldn't be. We huddled together, our breaths shallow and quick. The tension between us was unbearable. It felt like we were trapped in some kind of nightmare. And then, just before we made a move, a terrible thought struck me. There was someone in the dark, standing just behind us. My stomach churned, my mind racing as the realization struck, we'd been so consumed by the fear of the unknown that we had missed the most crucial detail of all. I staggered back toward the tents, trying to regain some semblance of control, but it was too late. The panic had set in. "Let's just sleep together tonight," Sally suggested. "We'll figure this out in the morning." We all agreed. But deep down, I knew we wouldn't make it until morning. Something was watching us. As we huddled together in the tents, our bodies pressed close for comfort, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The weight of it pressed down on me, and the last thing I remember before sleep overtook me was the faint, rhythmic sound of breathing from somewhere, just outside the tent. Underscore 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 underscore. A scream shattered the silence in the middle of the night. Ava's voice, sharp, terrified, woke me from my fitful sleep. Dave and I scrambled out of our tent, rushing toward the others. We found them outside Eric's tent, horror painted across their faces. His sleeping bag was rolled up, but he wasn't inside. His body, twisted, bloodied, lay in the center, contorted in agony. We didn't stay to find out more. "Run," Dave ordered, his voice breaking with fear. "Run." We bolted, the night air sharp in our lungs. The trail was barely visible, the light from Dave's flashlight weak and trembling as it illuminated the path. The forest closed in on us. Ava tripped. Her ankle twisted, and we stopped to help her. But before any of us could react, there was a scream, her voice, suddenly cut short. Sally ran after her, calling her name, but Dave stopped her. "No," he said, his face pale. "We can't go back." We kept running, desperate to reach the safety of our car. But even then, something was behind us, following us. I could feel it, that presence, closing in with every step. Dave glanced over his shoulder, his eyes wide with terror. "Who's behind us?" I gasped, breathless. Dave's face twisted in fear. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes going wide. "Keep running," he shouted. I didn't stop. I couldn't. But when I glanced back, Dave wasn't with me anymore. I didn't stop until I reached the car. My fingers fumbled with the keys as I slammed the door shut behind me, heart hammering in my chest. I threw the car into gear and sped down the trail, my foot pressing hard on the gas. Now, I'm here at a rest stop, typing this out. The phone service has finally returned. I've called 911, but they don't believe me. They say I'm just in shock. I'm not sure what I believe anymore, but there's one thing I know for certain, I'm not alone. I've been driving for hours, but every time I glance in the rearview mirror, I can see someone sitting in the back seat. And they've been so quiet this whole time. I've been blind my entire life. It's not something I mourn. In some ways, I'm glad I never had sight to lose. It seems a more profound grief than never having it at all. I live in the darkness, but my other senses more than compensate. They've shaped me into the writer I am today. Readers tell me my prose has a way of pulling them in, evoking smells, sounds, and textures in a way that sighted writers often neglect. Where others describe a red apple, I speak of its firm skin, its tart snap against the teeth, and the faint, earthy scent of orchard grass. My blindness isn't a limitation, it's my lens. For years, I lived in a cramped Upper East Side apartment, where every creak and crack of the floor was as familiar to me as the back of my hand. But as my writing career flourished, so did my yearning for space, a larger canvas to match my imagination. That's when I purchased the house. It's a sprawling property, or so I've been told, nestled in the suburbs where the air is crisp, and the mornings are filled with birdsong. My friends called it a mansion. To me, it was simply home, a place where I could drink my coffee in sunlight and lose myself in the sounds of the world outside. Of course, there was the staircase. People worried about me moving into a house with multiple levels. "What if you fall?" they asked. But I've always been careful. I memorized every inch of that staircase within days of moving in. 14 steps. That's all it took to reach the second floor. 14 steps, perfectly counted every time, until the motion became reflexive. Then, one night, I tripped. I was descending to fetch a glass of water when my foot caught on an unexpected step. My heart leaped into my throat as I stumbled forward, barely catching myself against the wall. Confused, I crouched down, feeling the wood beneath my fingers. There was an additional step, a 15th. I dismissed it as a mistake. Perhaps I was tired, distracted, or simply miscalculated. After all, I'd lived here for months without incident. But later, as I ascended back to bed, I misjudged the top of the staircase. Another step where there shouldn't have been one. Frowning, I counted aloud as I went up again. 14 steps. Just as it should be. I shook my head, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me like cobwebs. A few days passed without incident. Then, late one night, the stairs betrayed me again. This time, I fell hard, landing awkwardly on my ankle. The pain was sharp but not unbearable. As I sat there in the dark, gingerly flexing my foot, I realized something horrifying. There were more steps. 2 more, to be precise. I counted again, my fingers trailing over the smooth wood. 16. The number clawed at my brain like a splinter, but when I climbed the staircase a third time, there were 14 steps again. By now, my unease had grown into a gnawing dread. The stairs were changing. Logic screamed against the idea, but my body knew better. Each step felt wrong, foreign, as if I were trespassing in my own home. That night, I decided to count once and for all. I descended slowly, gripping the handrail and murmuring the numbers under my breath. 14 at the bottom. On my way back up. 18. I swallowed hard, a cold sweat prickling the back of my neck. The house was too quiet. The silence felt suffocating, oppressive. My skin prickled as though I were being watched. I went down again. 14 steps. Then back up. 27. By the time I reached 33, my breaths came in shallow gasps. The staircase no longer felt like it belonged to my home. It was an alien thing, stretching and warping, drawing me further from reality. I don't know what compelled me to keep climbing, but as the numbers climbed into the 50s, then the 80s, I felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness. Something was there. Something waiting. Watching. Malevolent. At 102 steps, I stopped. My legs trembled, and my hands were slick with sweat. The air was thick and heavy, pressing down on my chest. I couldn't take another step. I didn't want to know where the staircase led. I turned, intending to retreat. But the moment I turned my back on those steps, a primal terror overtook me. I scrambled upward on all fours, panting and shaking, desperate to reach the top. My hands fumbled for the bedroom door, and when I found it, I slammed it shut and locked it. Now I'm here, typing this. My fingers shake as I recount the events, but it's the only way to keep my mind from spiraling. The house is no longer quiet. I can hear it now, the slow, deliberate creak of footsteps on the stairs. And they're getting closer.